So we're going to go to Program, Membership, because that's where our people are located, or is under Membership. You can do this if you just want to add a specific individual and attach it to somebody existing. I'll show you how you can do that. And we will also go over how to, so my daughter got married and she no longer is in our home. Well, how do I put her somewhere else and her not lose all of her history? So we're going to go over that as well, okay? But the first thing we're going to do is just add an actual address record. The regional database, so the address record, if you have churches that use this program, they have this. It looks just like this, except one very important thing for you guys is this church field right here. That church field is what's unique to state offices and regionals. This church field is what connects that family to that church. So if you're working and helping maybe one of your local churches and they're showing you something and they don't have that church field, don't panic. They shouldn't have that because they don't have churches under them. So they have a different section. So we're going to add one thing. I keep flying that window across the screen. Same as the church record. We're just going to click Add this time instead of multi-add. So let's just add yeah, why not? And then the mailing name would be Salutation. Let's do this. Mailing name, Mr. and Mrs. Andrew. Salutation would be Andrew. Okay. What's the difference between these fields? Let me zoom this in for you guys so you can see. I love the zoom. So what's the difference between these fields? It's when you're printing labels or you're printing reports, and you're going to see this when we go to do reports, you have options to say, print the mailing name, print the salutation name, print the label name. And you click salutation and print, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just print all these labels. None of them have the Reverend and Mrs. None of them have, the last name. None of them have that. Why? Well, what's in your salutation? Because when you checked that in the report, that's what's going to come out. So remember, whatever you input, that's what's going to get taken out. So if you don't like that it just said Andrew and Kylie and it didn't have the Reverend and Mrs. or the Mr. and Mrs. in this case, then you need to look, well, where do I have the name that I want to print on this label? Well, in this case, I have it in the mailing name, so I want to make sure I have that checked. Or in the label name, and I have that checked. You see how it works? Okay, so if you were to go to help.suran.com, you're going to get this site right here. This site is great. There's a couple things you can do. You can simply type in something right here and hit enter, and it's going to give you everything that has to do with treasure, whether it's on the desktop, whether it's in, well, it's not going to be in mobile because I typed treasure, but it's going to give you no matter where in the Help Center it's at. And when you click it, it's going to take you to this information. And it's the other way you can do it. If you have questions about the desktop itself, which is what we're talking about this morning, for example, you can click it, and there are all kinds of different areas of the desktop program listed right here. There's even a regional section, administration, and here's where you can get the manuals. January, more so for our accounting. You have your end of the year survival guide and different things like that, but just so on. And so if you were to click, so right now, let's just say we're talking about address records. When you're over here, after clicking, you can see where it says, Well, you can't, but instead of zooming, it says address, individual, phone numbers, all the different areas of membership. And then when you click it, it walks you through kind of what I'm doing here. The Help Center is wonderful for this type of stuff. It also showcases and it talks about our CDM mobile, which we'll talk about. And let me pause. And overseers are going to love your CDM mobile, and even you guys, because if you get asked, hey, what's this person's phone number? You know, we've had multiple different, and you guys will all understand this. No overseer has the same personality. No overseer works the same way, right? You got those who are in the office every single day. They sit down, man, they get a ton of office work done. And it's like, this is nice, I can do this. Then you got some, you're not really sure where they're located that day. You're sending a message, are you coming in? I got a couple things to sign. Oh, you're not, will you be in? Like, you don't know the personalities. And you have some that are on the fly, have a question, and they know that they can call you and get that information from you. Be available, but I'm not at my desk. How do I get that information? CDM Mobile will give you like their phone number, their address, and so on. So it's great. And if they don't know how to use it or if they struggle with things like that, you can do it for them and you can give them information. We're going to talk more about CDM Mobile. Side note with it, highly encourage you to get it. How many of you have a hard time chasing down receipts at the end of the month, especially from the youth directors, who's the youth secretary? Yeah. You can. Maybe will help a little bit with mobile. I'll show you how they'll be able to click and upload their receipts for you, so you don't need it. It's a great thing. And then it talks more about CDM Engage, that's our online giving, and so on. So our Help Center is full of information, and it's constantly growing. We're always adding more information to it, but this is also where you can get those manuals. So I wanted to just take a second and show that to you. So let's get back to this. If we have Kylie and Andrew here, we have a primary address and an alternate address. Primary address would be where they spend most of their time. But how many of you guys have snowbirds, especially your retired ministers? And at least where I am in Ohio, they like to go down and visit the Florida campground. My grandpa did it all the time. I'm pretty sure he just loved to sit there and watch people like all the time. And he'd be gone for months. And I'm like, man, when do I get to do something like that and not get and see the snow? You know? But if I wanted to mail him something, how would I know where he goes? Because he's not in Ohio right now. And, you know, they didn't redirect their mail or anything like that. That's where this alternate address comes into play. You can put in where he's going to be for those wonderful snowy months. You can even put in when he's going to be there, from a month and a day, and it goes in and does it that way. Or you can tell it to send it to the alternate address. You can tell it automatically to flip. It's a great thing for your snowbirds. Now, those of you who are in Florida or a warmer climate, you don't have this problem. But if you're in Ohio, Michigan, New York, you know, the kind where it just won't stop snowing, and it's just, you know, they retire, they get the luxury of leaving. They're not like us. We're stuck. We're hoping that it's a light snow, you know, and stuff. So you do have these issues sometimes. Or, for example, my son-in-law, he was in the Army, you know, so she lived with us, and he had his own thing. So we kind of moved her to our record so it would have that address, and then put an alternate address for wherever he was stationed. You know, he had his main one in Killeen because he was stationed at what at least was called Fort Hood. I do not remember what it's called now. But then when he would get deployed, we could put in that address there. So you see, that's where that alternate address would come into play. Is it required? Nope. I don't need an alternate address, right? I'm not going anywhere. I pastor a church, and I'm pretty sure they would not like if their pastor left. Well, my husband pastors it. If we left for 3 months just to get away from the snow, and we left them hanging in the snow. Now, if we could take them all, they would probably love that. We'd be their favorite pastor, right? But you type in the address right in here. and so on. Okay? Mailing codes, when we were in that master coding system, you can add mailing codes there, or you can add them on the fly. Like, let's say we have a military mailing code. So then when one exists, so just like the status in the church record, I can add them on the fly. Okay? Or I can do receives all mailings, however. Because again, we're thinking with the end in mind. If I wanted to print an address for the homes, the whole family, what is consistent with all of the people that I am wanting to have printed? Receives all mailings, military, what is it? That's what I want to use when I search. Well, then that's also what I want to use for mailing codes. I don't need a care group. Maybe I need something else, so I can go in, and when we go to preferences, you'll see we can go in and change that to something else. Okay? Now, I'm just created, though, only the address part, but I have people that live in this house. So we have Kylie. By default, it does the last name. Let's say they have a different last name. You could go right in here and do that, and it will give them a different last name for their individual record. Because remember, the whole house isn't Nelson. The whole house is Graska. But maybe she had a different last name, or they have foster children, or what have you in there, and they are different last names. You can use that in here. For the sake of me remembering for the future, we're going to do that. Family status, you can add more to this, either on the fly or in that master coding system. You see why we started with master coding system today? It helps you to structure what you need, and you can go back and change things. But in here, you have an adult, child, head of house, spouse, other, whatever you want. And in this case, she's going to be the spouse. Hit tab. Let's add Andrew. Okay? If they had children, we could put that in. And for the sake of my heart right now, we're not doing that. I am not ready for that one yet. So now I have address and individual. What is great about this, do you remember me saying how I could go to the giving unit record window and manually put in that giving unit and connect it? In here, I'm in the address window. When I hit save, because I have two names up there, I now will have two individual records automatically. You don't have to go now to individual record and put all that information in and connect it to the address record. You can do it right here. Time saver. In fact, and they changed this a few years ago, now I can even go, if I want them on the directory newsletter, I can even go to phones and emails and add a phone number. Well, they don't have an address phone. Does anybody have landlines anymore? It's very few people, right, that have landlines. But my phone number is the main number. If somebody's going to call my house, it's going to be me, because the Lord knows that that's about how they're going to get a hold of us. I don't know if it's just us, but if they need something, they need to call me first, because chances are my husband ain't going to get it right away. So let's say that's the case for my daughter. So it's her mobile phone, so I know the type is mobile. That way, when I am wanting to send a text message from CDM mobile, I can choose that, and it's going to give it to me. But I also know she's the primary number. You don't have to have a primary, but it helps me to know that this person, when they want us to call, they want us to call this number first. Does that make sense? So then, sorry, I keep flying the window. So now I put in the number, any notes that I want, like call first. I can do that if they have extensions, so on. Now, here, this under individual, right now it says address. If I was to leave it in address, this is not an individual's phone number. This is now the whole house's phone number. So if I was going to look up an individual phone number and I go to the individual record, or I want to print a directory and I have only individual phones printed, this number isn't going to print because it's not any individual's phone, right? It's the address record's phone number. And so while that's good, and there are times you need that because people do have, some people still have landlines, I would assume, especially if you're in more like, you know, you have some older people, that's all they have. You still, I personally would probably attach them still to the individual, but if you have a family and they have like a landline connected to the address, you know that doesn't belong to anybody. That's just the house's phone number. Years ago, when everybody had their home number and then you had cell phones, you would use this a lot because I would know this is that house number, and then here's Jennifer's number, here's Jake's number. You see what I mean? And in this case, this isn't their address, this is Kylie's. So when I click, there are those two individual records that we just added. And so when I click it, I can click on Kylie, and now that's her number. So if I want to say add Andrew, I had like how many numbers are there in its phone number. And then I can click and I can do Andrew. Okay. Same goes for emails. You can do add email. You can select your type. If you want to get more detailed in the type, you can just add different types either on the fly or in that master coding system. So if you click here, then you can type, you know, I don't know, Kylie@gmail.com. We know that's definitely not right. And then whoever's email address that is. Definitely wasn't Andrew's. Okay. Any questions so far regarding this?
On the phone record, we had a problem with switching our primary number. Once the primary number was established, we weren't able to change that.
Like you can't, so the question is, we can't change the primary number. So when you click change, you cannot do that? Okay, and it might be then, that's one of those we can look and see there might be something different, or you're in a different area of the program, like the individual record, to change it. You need to be in the address record to change primary. So, giving units, you can, and I'm not going to go into depth, so if you have like a more detailed question regarding this, just hang tight. We will talk a lot giving units when we do the contribution records, okay? But giving units, I can create a one for the whole family, so that, because Kylie and Andrew say are going to give this together, when they do their taxes at the end of the year, they file together. But sometimes people don't. And when they don't, you can separate them and give them their own giving unit, because at the end of the year, you're giving them a statement. Well, and where this comes into play is sometimes you have business. In fact, there's going to be a great one, because theirs will come into play. She's a realtor. Chances are she's going to have to file separately. So it just doesn't, you know, and maybe not, they'll find out. Well, if she does, and she ends up down the road filing separately because she's her own business with it, she needs her own giving unit record. That way, if she gives, she wants to put that against her taxes. And if he gives, he wants to put it against his. And if they don't, and they want it together and he takes it, that's fine, put it in one giving unit record. But you can have more, and we'll talk more about those use case scenarios, but you can add them here. And just like in the church record, the code, by default, they usually do about 4 letters, or 4 letters and 3 numbers. That's by default. You can do whatever you want. Like at our church, we do last name, and if there's more than one last name, we do the last name and first letter of the first name. There are churches that just do straight numbers. You do whatever you want with it. Again, codes are for you guys. It's for sorting and printing and stuff. If they were going to be separate, over here on the individuals, these are the individuals that are connected to that. So if we had children, so like, for example, I have the 4 of us in our house. You know, my one son works. He gives on his own. He has his own giving unit record. So he's not checked on this. He has his own in his address record, or in his individual. Okay? So you can just simply uncheck it, and that then will give them their own. Okay? If it changes down the road, and they decide they want to merge it together, we do have a merge feature. You can do that, or you can leave it. Personally, I'd recommend leave it separate because that timeline was to be run separate because they were doing it and filing it separate, and now they're doing it together, so it kind of just inactivate it. But again, it's a use case scenario, right? Everybody's got them all different, and we work with people to know that that definitely is the case. Connections, we're not going to go into depth with that right now. Connections would be more used in a church. You could use it in a state office. It's more like this person is the niece to this person, or this person is, this person's grandpa, or you know what I mean? You kind of connect them together so you can see how the families are connected. So like we could say they're connected to Jake Nelson, is her dad, and so on. You can do it that way. Photos. You can upload an individual, or this is the address photo. So you can upload, if you wanted, a photo. Just think this way. If you upload an address photo, what is the address? The whole house. So don't go uploading your ministers' pictures in here and then wonder when you go to print, minister, and see why is he not printing? Because remember, keep in mind, end in mind, is this information about the family and their house, or is this information about the individual record? But you can just simply click upload, and it puts the picture in there really nice. And to save you pictures, I don't even think I've got one in here. I'm not going to do that. Again, you got user fields, so you can do the user fields, groups. If you want to do it that way, again, with like church records, you can use groups in the address record, no problem. Most of the time, you tend to use the mailing codes, like that was at that first, then you really do in groups for address records. Is it wrong to do groups? We wouldn't have it here if it was wrong. It's just a way to grab reports. It's a way to grab sorting. I could do a search on groups and so on. And same with user fields. If I wanted to add, like here they have just for tests, you can see visitation helps, and they've got some, you could type in some information in there. So it's just another way to upload. But remember, whatever you put in the user field in this window, we're working in the address record window. So don't go putting your minister's information, and get all excited and load up their entire file, and only to find you just put it all in the address record. Okay? And visitation, pastoral, they can add notes to all of that. When we're done, we just simply click Save. I didn't connect them to a church. I might get screamed at. When you have 100 and something computers pulling at one, we learn patience, right? So in this case, I don't believe we connected him to a church, so this is good. So if I was to pull up people who belong to East Market and they don't show up, where is the first place you want to go? Here, the address record, because I connect the family to their church from their address record window. Well, what if, for some reason, and it can happen, you've got people who attend two different churches, do two different address records at that point, right? Because you got them connected to two different places. As far as this goes, not positions. That's a different subject we'll talk about in a second. Okay? So all you have to do is simply click change, because notice, remember how I said earlier, if it's not there, you don't need it? I have an address or a record highlighted. Look at all the options I have now, right? I can delete it, I can change it, I can print a report from it, I can click this individual here. So if I click individual or giving unit, it's going to jump me to those records. It's going to take me right to the individual record, which we're going to do here in a second, for that and every individual that's connected to that address record. It's like a jump button. When you're searching for things, Let me tell you, that's your favorite thing to do. Don't open up individual records and then type in the last name. It's so much easier if you're in this window, or whatever window you're in. If you need to see what else they're connected to, click those go, whatever's under that go. It's going to take you right to it. It's going to take you right to what's connected to that. And it's important because, like, if they created an extra one in Engage or something, which can happen, I can look and say, oh, they definitely, using those jump buttons, you can kind of tell. We'll talk more about that down the road. But I want to connect them to their church. So I'm going to click Change. And then over here is the list of the churches that are in my database in alphabetical order. Okay? City by city. So I'm going to connect them to East Market Street, and I click Save. Now, when we go to that church record, they're going to show up as members. And then what we can do, so they'll show up as members. So if I click Notice Now, I have a church jump button. So I click here, it's going to take me to that church that they're connected to. It doesn't give me everybody's church or all the churches in my database. It gives me that particular person or church that household is connected to. It's not that I can't search and things like that, which we'll show you. But now if I click on members, I haven't got to reorganize my thing. There's Kylie and Andrew. They're connected now to that church. So you can connect people to the church without them being the pastor or even holding a position at all in the church. But you want to know who all attends that church, or if somebody calls, to complain or whatever, you can look, do I have them in the database? Is this the church they actually attend? Oh, look, I see that they've probably, and you can see it in their past, like they're a past member. Okay, gotcha. And just do with what you want to do from there. You know what I mean? But you can see that. Past members would be very thing. You can go in and you would see that we don't have them on this particular one. Any questions so far? Have I maxed out your brain? Because if so, we got a long day ahead of us. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing great. All right. Let's add the individual, or let's edit the individuals. Yes, ma'am.
Some kind of question or comment where you did the drop down to find the church.
Yeah.
That drop down is very confusing sometimes because we don't always know what town a church may be in.
Yeah.
Is there a way for the powers that be that can somehow change that where we can choose maybe to have the town in front of it or not? Because even when they're registering online, a huge problem. They don't they should know the town they're in, I know, but they don't.
Oh, that's so true.
They're looking for Fifth Avenue. They're not looking for Tifton, Fifth Avenue.
Right. Yeah.
And it totally messes us up.
So the question is, when I click the drop-down arrow in the address record, sometimes it's very confusing because I don't really know the city that the church is in. And so where it also gets confusing is when they're registering, they don't always know their city. And she said, which is true, you should probably know your city you live in, or that at least you drive to go to that church. Very true. But the reality is sometimes they need a little bit of hand-holding. And can we set that? It's been years. We will look in the preferences, and if not, we'll put a story up to choose that if we want the city to be seen or not.
I would request that it be a suggestion or an option then, because we have more than one church with the same name.
Yes. Yeah, it would not be definitely, no, it needs to be, so like we have options, and we're going to preferences after this. You have options to, like, the layout of your phone number, or your time and date, how you want it to look. It would be something similar to that is where my head goes for a story, that we can choose how we want our churches displayed in those drop-down menus and do that. So then you could choose if you wanted to say city church name or church name only and stuff. Okay? That's a great thing. And when we get to preferences, if it's not there, we'll create a story for possible future development with that. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
The other thing I know, because I ran into this, we put the church name in with the city and then the church name, and then when you put that option in, it said like Akron.
Yep.
So you have to.
Yes. And that is great because our church, now we don't have it this now, and I'm sure my grandma would roll in the grave because we removed Akron and we removed we removed street, like we lowered our name because it's a long name. Akron East Market Street Church of God, is that what they would always call it? It's long. So we shortened it to East Market Church. But if you want to use the name that we have legally, it's Akron East Market Church. Well, because we are in the city of Akron, in our list, it's going to say Akron. But they call themselves Akron East Market Street Church of God. So it does kind of double it up. And there's not really anything you can do if you want to make sure the church name actually is what their legal name is, that says Akron East Market Street Church. And that's more when you deal with the accounting side of it or you're dealing with their legal documents and stuff like that. Those are great things to think about and to talk about, especially when you're putting in churches. If they don't go by that name in the city, just put the church name in there. You don't need, I always recommend when it comes to adding churches, what do they have when they filed, when they got organized, or if they've changed their name every 5-6 years, what is their legal name, what do they go by, and so on. Okay? You always know you hit a nerve when you hear everybody like talking like, we should be doing this, we should do this and that. Great questions. Let's add a position. So let's say Andrew is working in the church, and he's not a minister, but he works in the church. So we've got the individual record open. We're going to fill out some information that we have for him. Because he's not a minister, I am not going to check this minister's box, because when I do that, you'll see when we look at the other record, it opens up more information that only a Church of God minister needs, like their number and all of that kind of stuff, their reporting time and those types of things. It even links their minister's record reports to it. Sorry, guys. Hopefully it's not dizzy for you. But if I wanted to put his middle name, let's say he had a different name he goes by, or like in my husband's case, his legal name is Jacob, but he prefers to go by Jake. I could put Jake there, and his first name would be his legal name, Jacob, if you wanted to stick with that. That's where that is. That being said, if I wanted to use the preferred name in all of my labels and all of those types of things, there is a box that you can check that says use preferred name. So when I do print labels, that it won't say Jacob, it would say Jake with that. Okay? Do not print. If you have a minister that passes away, or they've moved out of state and they're no longer in there, do not print by default filters out them from the list or from reports. You have options to include those marked do not print, but by default, it's going to filter those things out. And we'll do one with do not print, but when you're searching and everything, you'll see a little box. I don't think we can see because I'm in edit mode. You'll see a box that says filtered in orange, and when you click it, it turns green, and all of the do not print options or people are there. So when somebody passes away, you obviously take them out of being a minister if they're a minister or what have you, but you click that do not print button. That way you go to print labels, they don't go printing out. There's nothing worse than trying to print labels and you got, somebody who's just passed away print out from there. Do not print is a great one for that. Address information, let's just say, Andrew, I don't use the alternate address scenario that I gave you, but let's just say Andrew's in somewhere different. I can override the address record for his record. So it's only going to be him. So if I print an address label for that family, it's going to print to Akron. But if I print an individual record or label, and I do for Andrew, it's going to do whatever address that I type in here because it's overriding it. That's his individual address. Now, there are options we're not going to get into for the sake of time that you can tell it, address, information or individual address and all of that. So sometimes people are like, this isn't printing, why? And you just have the wrong field because now this becomes his individual address because it's not part of that big record, right? It's not where he's currently at, but the whole house didn't move to Poland. He just did. Does that make sense? I like that I can tell I haven't lost anybody yet. I see nods and lightning. That's a good thing. It means I'm at least keeping your attention. When we get into Engage, and I show you things there, if they have an Engage account for online giving, you'll see the credentials in there, and you can add them. Phones, it's going to show all the phones, but you can see the ones that are connected. Same with email. Where I wanted to get to is this, the personal. So in here, you can choose whatever information you have for them you want to put in. So you can choose their gender, their birth date, if they have their father, mother, birthplace. Do you remember me talking about when we go to preferences, being able to change terms? What if I don't really care what their blood type is? I don't know if he would even know what his blood type is. He actually might, but I don't know if anybody else would know what their blood type is. But there might be something else that we don't have information, like a field for, that may be like, man, it'd be so great to know what branch of Army he's in. Something like that. I don't know. I can't think of things off the top of my head real quick sometimes. So let's just say military, and then you could type in whatever you want. So then we could print that up. So you can change those terms because we don't really need to know blood type, or if they're a donor for things, we don't need to know that, but we can change those terms. So think of it like that. There might be things you don't need on here, but that doesn't mean you can't use those fields. We just will rename them. But you have all this information. I want to show you something that is super, super important. When you're printing the COG church directory, and I had a great question about this a few weeks ago. A spouse passed away. They printed the directory. They made the spouse do not print. They did all those things, put a deceased date on it and everything. Spouse still printed next to that name. Why? This little thing right here is what prints next. You can mark them do not print. You can put their death date. You could totally archive them from the system. They're still going to print next to that pastor's name if you've not gone in here and changed that. Okay?
How can you preserve that information?
Preserve the information. So the question is, how can you preserve that information? It would be more of, in this case, probably using like the comments section of there and just put in the, married to whomever and when they passed away, things like that. So then you can also get more information as to why that changed and so on. So that's just so important, is to make sure you have that in there and that you change that, because it was a great question to have. And I'll be honest, when I say it's been years since we had set that up, because I did more at that point, helped them get things set up and all that. Well, then for probably 10 years, I didn't have to touch this. I trained them, left them go, So then when I got asked, that had been probably, 20 years later, I'm like, let me get back to you on that, because I need to refresh my brain. So it doesn't get used often because we don't have that happen too often, but there are times that does happen, especially in light of what we've had to deal with over the last several years. And so you do want to know those things. Or if you want and they didn't print on the report and you would like to have their spouse's print on the report, this is where you do it. So this is where you can put in all that information in. Personal to, ethnic code, baptism place, and so on. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Church of God Church Directory. You can tell it to print the spouse next to it.
Okay, we tell it to put the spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Then you click on plus, there's a plus sign, plus do not print equals unchecked.
That would be for the search. When we do reports, remind me to show you that that's a search. What you put in on the report to say it includes spouse, that's telling it what of that person or what of that church that you want to have on there, and you want it to print the spouse field that's on here.
Okay.
So when we get to the report, help me remember that. And if I don't explain it to you by then, I will show you what that means. Because I know what you're saying is include this spouse's record. This isn't including the spouse's record. It's going to have the pastor's name / Jen,
Right.
or whatever is there. It doesn't matter the search as far as if the spouse shows up or not. Great question, though. Education, if you wanted to put some information here, this would be great if you had ministers who you want to know went through MIP, CAMS, all those things, or they went to Lee, they went to the seminary, what school they went to. You can keep that information in here just so you have it. It's not required. It's just, again, something you could put in if you wanted to. He is not marked as a minister. Remember how I said when I check that box, it's going to open up more things? This is what it will open up. And I'll show you that. We're going to do that here in a second. But you needed to see this is deactivated because that box isn't checked. So you can't accidentally put in information for them unless you check that minister's box, and then that tab becomes active. And we'll do that here in a second. Okay? Church. So, yeah, he's not a minister, but he does carry, let's say, a position in the church. Let's say he's the minister of music. Because his address record already has him connected to a church, by default it kind of goes there. Because remember, we saw in the church record they were there, right? But I want to add a position. I want to know that he is the music minister. So I can select that. Let's say I don't have that position in here and he's a small group leader. Oh, that doesn't exist. By the time we're done today, you will know you can type things in, see that, and hit yes. I show that because to me, I'm a time saver person, and it saves time to be able to just do it on the fly and not have to pause, go to the master coding system, put it in, come back, and do it. I can do it right here on the fly, and now it's done. And I know it's in the right spot. I didn't accidentally click address and set it. So let's say he's a small group leader. Let's say he started doing small groups in 23. Now he carries a position in the church. If that position ended, then you would put the end date, and now it becomes a historical thing. And in the church, remember that past members? That's where it would be. And we'll do one with somebody else. I want to keep him this way so you guys can see how a non-minister can be showing with a position in the church. Any questions so far? What about multiple positions in the church? And you want them separated. It really doesn't matter because, yeah, they carry a position in the church, but maybe it does. Maybe your youth pastor or your youth director wants a list of all the youth pastors. Well, yeah, he's a small group leader, but maybe he's also the youth pastor of the church. If I printed labels for youth pastor, he's not going to show up, right? Because he doesn't carry that position according to the system. So you can have as many positions in the church as you want by simply just clicking Add Church, find your church. Let's say he's the youth pastor. He'd be like, Mom, no. And so on. So now he carries 2 positions in this church. Okay? And again, photos, you can add an individual photo. So if you wanted to have it just for your ministers or what have you, you can add that here is the individual photo. So you wouldn't put the couple's picture here. That would be for the address record. Groups. Do you remember when we talked about rosters? So this is where groups become super important. Do you remember with thinking with the end in mind, right? So if we're thinking with the end in mind, what type of reports would I need sometimes? Well, I might need to see a list of youth and children's pastors. So I can put him as a youth pastor, and maybe somebody else is a children's pastor, or maybe I need a list of who carries both the youth and music pastor, or music minister, or what have you. I can have him both in here as a roster, because what it does is it allows, again, he's not just a music minister. He's not just the youth pastor, right? He's both. Well, if my youth director says, hey, I want to know a list of all the youth pastors, and you look and you're like, I don't even know where to get that. I have them as a position, and you can print that, too. But in here, it's great with rosters. We all use them as state offices, but you can mark at the things that he has. I just don't have music minister as the one, so let's say missionary. He's loving me even more as I'm digging him into more ministries. Or let's say I created something for elected boards. If I had something in there, we didn't put it in the master coding system, I could put that he's on the state council, or he's on the youth board, and so on. These you create. Remember when we were in the master coding system and I said, think with the end in mind, you create what you need. You can add the groups. This is where it becomes important, because I would like to have my state council. I would like to have my youth youth board, or my music team. All these different things I'd like to have on here because I need to print them. Well, do I just throw them all under rosters? Sure, and have this massive list of rosters. Does any other state have a massive list of rosters like Ohio had? Or I could break it down even more so that I don't have this huge long list. I could have or the main category of group that says elected boards, and all of my elected boards, appointed committees, and my list of committees that they can be. You see what I mean? Or I could put all of them under rosters, and they're all there. What's easier for you? Both ways they're right. There's no wrong way. But what makes it easier? Some people don't care. They love their long list because they forget. Some people like things nice and organized. Again, we have different personalities, right? I probably recommend a little more organized because, again, we as secretaries and, those who don't move every so many years, we might know, but what if somebody else comes in? Or a new overseer's wife comes in, and they look and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. This is where try to keep systems in mind and try to be a little bit more. And overseers and your wives that are here, if you do the books, set them where it's going to work for you. If you get moved to another place, don't panic if it's not set right the same way. Doesn't mean it's not working the same way. It just means they might have had a massive list of rosters versus categories. Does that make sense? So there's no wrong way to do this. I mean, there's just what's easier. Yes, ma'am.
I will say that using the CDM app, that put it under position, and you can see it on the app.
Yes. So the app is a great thing. So when you're using the app, you keep that in mind. You can see it under positions. You can see it under groups in the individual records. You can do the sort. The longer you have it, the more you scroll and things like that. So think of ease. Now, what if I have all of this stuff and it's already long and I want to group that together? We can help you categorize it a little bit better by moving it for you, showing you how to move it. I'm not going to get into that today. But if you have that, it's not impossible to do. You do it in the master coding system, and it's okay. It's not going to break things. So it's not impossible to do that. But So if you do want to go, man, I didn't think about grouping these with elected boards and appointed committees and things like that, it's okay. If you want to dive into that on the day that you have a ton of time on your hands and you're sitting there twiddling with your thumbs, because we know in the state office we have a lot of time on our hands, right? Go for it. Have at it on your day off or whatever it is you do, because it's not happening probably through the day. Great question. User fields, again, if I created individual user fields like background checks, things like that, I can put all that information in there. So when we're all done, we simply click Save. That's given him more information.